As I reflected on the readings for this week, I kept coming back to the parable of the minas, or the parable of the pounds, depending on your version. We may be more familiar with the version of this parable in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. The basic story and structure is the same in both. Servants are entrusted with money while their master is away, and they are rewarded or reprimanded based on their faithfulness to the task. But I couldn't get past some of the details in Luke's version. For one thing, Luke's version has an explicit political resonance that Matthew's version lacks. It's not just a wealthy man, but a would-be king who takes a journey and leaves his servants in charge. In fact, the purpose of his trip was to establish his kingdom. And we're told that his subjects hate him. They send a delegation after him to oppose his mission. And until he returns, his servants are left in a state of profound political uncertainty. Will their master become king, or will his detractors win out? This is the context of the business they are supposed to be conducting with his money. And it's important to remember that business was not a private affair in the Middle East in ancient days. These servants weren't anonymously investing money into the stock market. They would have had to publicly conduct their affairs in the name of their master. Everyone knew, in other words, where their allegiances lay. And if their master was denied the kingdom he was seeking, you can imagine how they would have been treated by those who hated him. By putting their master's money to work, they were planting their flag in the ground, saying effectively, "This man is our king." That's why the servant who hid the money wasn't just being a bad capitalist. Politically, he was hedging his bets. If he didn't declare his allegiance before his master returned, maybe he would be free to join the winning team. But of course, the master sees right through this. The servant, trapped by his behavior, attempts to pay him a compliment, at least what would pass for a compliment to a powerful lord at the time. "I know you are a hard man," he says, "reaping where you do not sow and collecting where you did not deposit." Notice that his master neither confirms nor denies this claim. He simply says, "Okay, I'll judge you by your own words. If you really thought of me that way, then you should have at least put my money in the bank so I could have collected interest." And let's not forget that charging interest on a loan was forbidden by Jewish law. He sees right through the servant's excuse and gives his money to the first servant instead. The parable ends with the newly appointed king saying, "But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me." These words are harsh, to be sure, but the end of the parable is probably more open-ended than it sounds. Kenneth Bailey, an expert in Middle Eastern culture, points out that Westerners tend to assume that a no spoken by a powerful ruler is the last word. But for someone living in Jesus' time and place, it would probably signal the beginning of a difficult negotiation. And so it's noteworthy that the parable doesn't actually speak of the executions taking place. So while the command to kill the disloyal subjects clearly states what they deserve, whether it's carried out is another question. A tantalizing loose end, not uncommon in Jesus' parables. So what are we to take away from all this? If you've seen my other videos, it may not surprise you to hear me say that we need to begin by asking what the text reveals about Jesus before we ask the related but secondary question of what it means for us. In this regard, I think it's important to see that part of what Jesus does with this parable, with any parable, is to address the questions that are raised by his ministry. He's telling us about himself. So in this way, the parable of the minas can help to frame our understanding of what's to follow in the remainder of Luke's gospel. Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem, to be hailed as Messiah as he rides into town and be crucified a week later. And he wants to say something about who he is and what he's doing. The kingdom is coming, yes. In fact, Jesus is the coming king. But he's coming into a land where his own subjects hate him and do not want him to rule. And although some of his servants have been faithful, others have buried what they were given long ago. Maybe they'd given up hope that their king was coming and decided to throw their lot in with the powers that be. And open-ended or not, the last word of the parable is undoubtedly a harsh word of judgment, a powerful no to all who have rebelled against God's rule. Jesus himself enacts prophetic judgment when he enters the temple courts, driving out those who were selling there. He comes as judge. But this isn't the last word either. He also becomes the one who receives judgment. Jesus becomes, as Karl Barth puts it, the judge judged in our place. In Christ, the no is enclosed in a larger, all-encompassing yes. So as we read this week, I pray that we would all have eyes to see the ongoing work of God's kingdom on earth, that we would welcome Jesus as King, faithfully and publicly working together with him and with one another until he comes again.